Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about why compassion, when it's offered to us from someone else, can sometimes be triggering. I'll also talk about how exposure therapy works and whether or not I've ever lied to a client of mine. Then I'm going to dig into how to deal with an internal emotional conflict, the stages of eating disorder recovery, and finally, how we are impacted by our subconscious mind and what that even means. Without further ado, let's jump into this first question. This question says, "Hey Kati, why do I get an anxious adrenaline rush every time someone shows any sort of compassion or pity towards me? Whenever friends or even my therapist show compassion or empathy, or when she says things like, 'I'm so sorry, that must have been so hard,' I feel simultaneously really good and acknowledged and cared for, but also very anxious and uncomfortable. Growing up, I had a very caring and emotionally available parents, so the anxiety isn't due to compassion being a foreign concept or something that's new to me or anything like that. It just makes me feel vulnerable and fragile and like there's too much attention on me. And it makes me feel small and like a child again. Why does this happen? Also, in therapy, I often feel younger than I am. Why?" I thought this question was very interesting because obviously the initial reaction that this person had anticipated from me was, is it foreign to you? Is it something that has never been offered? They're like, no, my parents were really caring and emotionally available. However, they still feel this way. And the interesting thing for me is that you said that receiving this, so when you're offered compassion, it makes you feel vulnerable and fragile, like there's too much attention on you. And I guess I'm really curious as to the connection, right? When we're aware of like, hey, this triggers this and it makes me feel this kind of way. So in this case, it'd be like someone showing me compassion makes me feel fragile, vulnerable, and like there's just too much attention. My question to you is, why do we feel like those are bad things? When in our life has it been bad to feel like people are paying attention? Why are we so uncomfortable with attention? And I have a couple hypotheses, okay? Because we think our parents were great and everything like that, I'm wondering if, even though your parents were emotionally available and they were caring, I don't know if they were very verbally supportive. Meaning, did we hear a lot of like, you're so great, that's amazing? Or did we get a lot of attention on our birthday or when we had a big event? Did our family make a big to-do of those things? I'm guessing they didn't, because every family's way of showing love and affection is going to be different. It's almost like if we talk about the love languages, maybe your family's love language is not words of affirmation. And so to receive that is like, ooh, it's probably not your love language either. So when people offer you compassion, understanding, or even support and excitement, we don't know what to do with it. It's foreign in that way. Or it could be that we have a negative sense of self for whatever reason, right? We could have been bullied as a kid. We could struggle with our own body image or struggle with depression or anxiety or any slew of mental illnesses. And therefore, when somebody like acknowledges it, or calls it out or pays attention and says something, it's like exacerbating this already existing thing within us. So that even though we feel like, oh, validated, like our therapist is like, that must have been really hard for you. You're like, yeah, it was, but ooh, you saw that. I let my guard down. That makes me feel even worse. Or like if we were bullied or something like that, that means that I'm more vulnerable to having something like that happen. Because remember, like traumas and upsets and difficulties don't only come from our parents. They can come from our friendships, or maybe not really friendships, like being bullied. It could happen at school in many ways. Like maybe we had a teacher who was a total asshole, or a coach that wasn't very good or something, right? We could still have been affected. And so I guess my question for you is, where do we think this could come from? Do we think it's because we, have anxiety, feel anxious all the time? And so when someone shines a light onto us and shows us what we think is going on and says like, I'm so sorry, that we're like, oh, but you see me. And that's uncomfortable in and of itself because of our anxiety disorder. That's quite possible. Or our depression, or our body image where we're like, I don't want you to pay attention, don't see me. Right. We can feel that kind of way. Or is it coming from a totally different experience? Maybe we were bullied. And so someone drawing attention pointed it out. makes us feel like we're vulnerable to being hurt again? Or did we feel like our parents weren't words of affirmation people? Again, that's not a bad or good thing. We just might not be used to it. Do we think that's not our love language? I feel like it could come from all of those different areas. And I know that's, we want to have like an answer, but only you know which one of those rings true for you. And I'm also giving a bunch of examples. So if anyone else out there, because it's got a lot of thumbs ups, if anybody else in our community is like, hey, I feel that way too, maybe one of those other options resonates with you more as well. Because while our parents and our relationship with them is our most important and vital relationship, it doesn't mean it couldn't have come from other places too, or a mental illness we're struggling with currently. And so I really think those are some of the reasons. And then your final question, in therapy, you often feel younger than you are. Why? I have a lot of patients who said this over the years, and I have a couple of ideas. Number one is the power dynamic. When we go into therapy, even myself, you look up to your therapist. And I even prefer to see a therapist who's older than me by enough that I can automatically be like, oh, they're older than me. So I like to see someone older, and that power dynamic makes me feel kind of like younger, or like more of a little kid version, because I'm going to them for help and I'm looking up to them. Does that make sense? And that power dynamic in therapy can create this kind of us feeling younger, them feeling older and like wiser. That's very natural. That I think that's a pretty normal therapeutic experience. So that's one option. Another could be that even though our parents were caring and emotionally available, maybe as we grew up, hang with me here, we never really continued sharing in emotions like we did when we were little, or we never expressed upsets as we got older. Maybe we grew up thinking that as we get older, it's not acceptable or okay to like cry or throw fits. Like, you're too old for that. Maybe we were told that. I've heard from a lot of my patients over the years that they can feel like, hey, as you get older, it's like, it's not okay. It's not acceptable to throw a tantrum, to be upset, to cry, to be angry and express it. Like all of that, those are things that kids do. Those are tantrums. Adults don't do that. And so when we go to therapy and we express ourselves and we cry and we tell our therapist how angry we were about something or how distressing this event was, it can make us feel younger. So those are usually the two main options I see. But there is a connection. If neither of those resonates with you, there is a connection for some reason in you expressing what's going on, like sharing your emotional experience, and a younger version of you. And so I'm really curious if when you were younger, did you feel like you weren't able to express it, or did you feel like that was the only time you could express it? It comes from some kind of piece like that. But the most common, again, is that power dynamic, feeling like the therapist is like a parent, like there's someone that you go to, like a specialist, right? They're like an expert, and we go see them, and it can feel like we're like, just a little version of us. Yeah. So those are some of my ideas. I hope at least one of those resonates. If not, feel free to send in a follow-up question. Okay. Let's move on to question number 2. This question says, hey, Kati, if the point of exposure therapy is to expose oneself to the anxiety-inducing situation in order to prove to ourselves that it's not that bad or as bad as we think, how is that supposed to work if the situation is as bad or even worse than what we anticipate? Like, if someone has social anxiety and making a phone call or meeting a friend for coffee is super scary because you worry about saying or doing something embarrassing or not having anything to say or your mind going blank, etc. What do you do if every time without fail, you somehow do manage to embarrass yourself and have so many awkward silences and not know what to say? And afterwards, you spend ages ruminating about how awful and awkward it was and just think, what's the point? That exposure got me nowhere. I got nothing out of it except shame and self-blame. What do you do then? There's a couple of things. I love this question because this understands a piece of exposure therapy. Yes, in a perfect world, we'd be able to expose ourselves to the thing and it would go better than we had anticipated, and then it would slowly lessen the anxiety about that. However, for most of us, this is the truth, that we will go out and because we're so filled with anxiety and stress about it, it might not go well. We might say something stupid or embarrassing or, oh, I forgot, my mind went blank, right? Therefore, the biggest piece of exposure therapy that I want to talk about today is the buildup before you even do the exposures. And that buildup is when we create and grow and essentially strengthen our resources. That means that when we start to feel anxious, overwhelmed, stressed out, we feel that we have something to do. We might do a body shake. We might put a cold rag on our neck. We might have a fidget toy. We might call a friend. We might go for a walk, shaking it out, dunking our face in cold water. There's a ton of different things that we can do. We can even do grounding techniques if those happen to work. All of that might have a healthy, safe place that we go to in our brain, or a neutral place. If we have any trauma in our past, safe can feel kind of unsafe. So we might want to go to a neutral space in our head. All of that can help us manage as we feel the anxiety ramping before we get to the point where we're like, my mind is blank. I can't think straight. My palms are sweating like crazy. I feel like I'm going to faint, until our anxiety gets too high. We want to stop it before it gets there. So a ton of the work in exposure therapy is to build up those resources so that as we imagine ourselves exposing, ourselves to that situation or thing or person or whatever, as it builds and we feel it build, we have something to do, an action we can take. And that is super empowering. And that's what, in the end, allows us to go out into the world, expose ourselves to the anxiety-producing situations, and to manage it. Just exposing ourselves could potentially make it worse. Like in your case, you're like, I just feel worse, shame and self-blame. What's the point of all of this? We need more resources. We need to be able to slowly engage with an exposure. Like a lot of times it's visualization first. We even had a member of our community who was afraid of snakes. And so part of it was looking at photos online. First it was imagining, then she got a toy snake thing, looking at photos, whatever gradual build that you can do. That's how we expose ourselves. We don't just go, there are some treatments where they do flooding, where they throw you into something, but we also have resources first because we don't want to make it worse. And so that's why exposure therapy works. And that's probably why it's not quite working for you right now, because we need more resource building and we probably need to take breaks and do a little bit less. Maybe, before the phone call, we do a body shake. As we wait on hold, we have a cold rag on our neck, right? Those things are things that we can do, but it might even just be imagining it happening before. So I don't know if you're in therapy, but I'd talk to your therapist about it. If you're looking for more resources or more coping skill ideas, I have them on my video, 25 coping skills. You can just look that up on YouTube, but I also mentioned some here. So I hope that helps, because the goal is not to flood ourselves with it. The goal is to slowly build and to help manage and mitigate the stress and anxiety that comes up as we do it. Okay. Moving on to question number 3, it says, hello and happy Thursday. Happy Thursday. My question is, have you ever lied to a client? Would you ever condone it if you were to lead other clinicians? When is it hardest for you to be honest with clients? Now, the truth about it is that I think we've talked about this before. It feels very familiar. I can't think of a time that I've ever lied to a client. Now, I might lie by omission. And why I say it that way is because I might realize something right away, or think this relationship that they're in is super toxic and terrible. And I'm like, we got to get you out of there. But I can't say that right away because you, as my patient, have to come around to it first. If I just go around telling you God, that boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever that you're in a relationship with, if they're the worst, that's like a judgmental friend. Then you'll stop telling me about them or stop seeing me. And then you're not getting the support that you need. Instead, we'll talk about placing boundaries or asserting yourself, clear communication, things that will all improve that relationship or show you that other person isn't growing with you or healthy or whatever. And then you'll decide on your own if you want to leave them or if the relationship improves, you want it to move forward, whatever. So in that case, I guess you could call that a lie by omission, because I will know something, but I'm not going to say it. But that's just part of therapy, is that you have to realize it yourself. I would never lie to a patient in general, unless I guess there are a few instances where I would be forced to for confidentiality. And I haven't had this happen, but if one of my patients asked me, are you seeing my friend, her name or his name? I couldn't tell them. I'd say I can't confirm nor deny it. Oh, Roxy agrees. So that would be another reason, because it's confidentiality. I can't say anything like that. That would be a breach, that would be illegal. And that wouldn't be appropriate. And so those are really the only reasons. I don't actually see a reason to ever lie to a patient. other than in those scenarios. And maybe there's others I might come up with, but it's very few and far in between, because the goal of therapy is to like not only challenge you with good questions to get you thinking about your life and your behaviors and your situation, your symptoms, like getting you to think about it in a new way. That's a huge part of therapy. But there's also this piece of like practicing healthy, direct, and clear communication and having a relationship slowly build on that. That's really powerful. And so I wouldn't lie, because that's never going to bring it anywhere good, right? And I don't even see the point of it. If there's something that needs to be said, I'm going to say it. And if I just wouldn't even make anything up. I don't even know why I'd put energy into that. And so there's no real time I'd ever condone it, if I was like helping other clinicians, other than, like I said, the confidentiality piece and the fact that you can't just like go out and tell your patient like, hey, this person's a jerk and you should break up with them, or tell them how to quote unquote fix their life. Because technically as therapists, we really don't know exactly how you're supposed to fix your life. We're supposed to work with you so that you can figure out the best next steps for you to move you towards your goals. So yeah, that's really it. And then that last question, when is it hardest for you to be honest with your clients? I don't really think it's ever really difficult. I guess when I know something that would be helpful for them, like I've come to this realization and it takes them a while to get there. Sometimes I wish I could rush it or say something, but I know it won't resonate that way. So I guess that's a little uncomfortable, but when they finally come around to it, it's like, oh, it's so magical. So it's kind of worth the wait. So that's it. I hope that helps. Okay, moving on to question number 4. It says, I'm curious on how to deal with always feeling emotionally, internally conflicted. Sometimes I feel great, like nothing's wrong with me. And then other times I just want to lay in bed and do nothing because everything feels pointless. What happens when this causes you to not fit certain diagnostic criteria? I feel like I'm asked questions like, what's your general mood been? Or do you have negative thoughts about yourself? I have trouble answering because I feel so confused about the conflicting emotions that I have. It's like sometimes I'm confused by how I could even be having negative thoughts or feelings or thoughts because of how contrary I feel at other times, but not consistently in any sort of pattern. It's a great question. And a couple things popped into my head. First is that feelings, emotions in general, they come and go. We don't have to engage with them. They can flutter through. Even if we do engage with them, they only stay around as long as we want them here. I told you guys this a while ago, but I did some research for my book. I don't even think I ended up including this, but still went down a rabbit hole nonetheless. And there was some research, and I'm forgetting the name of the woman who did it. I'll figure it out. Maybe it'll come to me. But anyway, she did research on how long it takes for an emotion to essentially work its way through our system. And it's around 90 seconds. And the way they know that is they tested your blood, because like when you get angry, for example, your body releases certain chemicals into your bloodstream to get you moving, get you going, to fight, flight, right? You're in that. And so they tracked when you could see that that's in our bloodstream and when it's out. And they learned it's about 90 seconds for it to completely wash through your body. The reasons we stay angry or upset longer is because we keep replaying situations in our head or keep engaging with the person who caused this anger to initially, erupt. And that continues that 90-second cycle. It's like we start it over and over and over and over again. Therefore, when you feel like your feelings come and go, that's normal. That's to be expected. That's actually healthy and regular. But if you're feeling, the truth about it is when it meets diagnostic criteria, like let's say we have major depressive disorder, for example, they should be asking you, do you feel depressed most days? And if you're like, oh, like one day on, one day off, then it wouldn't be major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder happens for most of the day, most days for 2 weeks. So it's like we don't really get a break. And those 2 weeks are like, oh, it's so heavy. It can be so overwhelming. But we might have, some kind of stressor. Back in the day when I was in school, we learned what are known, I don't think they call them this anymore, but they used to be called V codes. And V codes were essentially like, hey, I had a stressor in my life. Like I got into a fight with my friend. I had a disagreement with my partner, and I felt upset for this period of time, and it like messed with me a little bit. And those were the ways that we would essentially mark that someone was having an issue in their life, or an instigated event that caused, emotion dysregulation or some mental illness symptoms, but nothing that really is like a full diagnosis. And so it might be that that's kind of your experience, is that we have these triggers and you truly, react normally. If you get upset, life is hard and we have ups and downs. But when it comes to diagnostic criteria, a lot of it has to do with whatever these timelines are. And so that's why they ask you like specific questions, because they're wanting to know, like, is this pervasive? Has it been lasting for like a month or 6 months or 2 weeks, or how long has this been going on? And if you're like, well, it kind of comes and goes, then maybe it's not so much about a specific diagnosis. It's having better tools and techniques to help us manage or mitigate those ups and downs, or that mood dysregulation that we might be feeling. We might need some tools to help us deal with that. A great way to track, if you're like, I don't know, maybe it is happening more or less, I don't know, it's like, it feels like it comes and goes. You can utilize one of the apps out there. There's like eMoods is one. There was another piece of like recovery record, which I use for my eating disorder patients, where you can track your mood there. There's a ton of different apps. If anybody has one that they use that they like, leave it in the comments, because I know there's a ton of different ones that our community likes and utilizes. Even the Clue app, which is a period tracking app, they also have something in there for tracking your mood. So those are all ways to kind of see how it's really going and check in with yourself in a real way, versus when you go in and get asked questions like, how's your general mood been? That's kind of hard if it doesn't, especially in the moment, if we don't feel terrible. You're like, it was bad, but now I guess I'm okay. It can feel confusing. And so I just want you to know that what you're experiencing is normal. Nothing is wrong with you. A lot of us feel the ups and downs of life because life, but they're asking you certain questions to see what criteria you might meet if we're looking for a specific diagnosis. But nobody says we have to have a diagnosis to warrant getting help. We all need help. We'll all benefit from therapy, and we all are worthy of reaching out and speaking up. So don't let that deter you, okay? But just remember that it's normal for feelings and emotions to come and go. That's kind of their MO. That's how they're supposed to work, okay? Let's move on to question number 5. It says, hey, Kati, first I'd like to thank you for the wonderful and helpful work that you do. It's all very much appreciated. Of course. I'm so happy I could help. After 15 very long years, I've finally been able to give up my eating disorder. That's fucking amazing. I feel like confetti. Cue the confetti. I'm happy to say that I've been behavior-free for just over a year. Amazing. However, I still have body image issues, and it certainly doesn't help that I happen to be overweight. I realize weight loss isn't the answer. It never is. I'm 58 years old, and I can't seem to stop the anxiety associated with eating, body size, and weight. I grew up in a larger body and experienced trauma associated due to that fact. I'd like to say I'm fully recovered in the new year and never again be triggered by photos of myself. What can you suggest might help me get the rest of the way? I guess my question is, have we done any inner child work or any trauma work? Because clearly the trauma was the cause of our eating disorder. It's the root. It's the reason that it exists. And I believe in order for you to not be triggered by seeing photos of yourself, we need to talk about the past trauma, talk about our past versions of self, and do that with a trauma therapist. It could be EMDR, could be somatic experiencing, could be talk therapy. We need to talk about it with them, so much so that it doesn't have any more emotional charge for us. Because I have a feeling that, and this is just in my experience with my patients, because I have a lot of patients who have very similar stories, at least what you've told me, they have very similar situations, okay? And a lot of it was that when they would see pictures of themselves when they were younger, or when they were, around when the abuse happened, they would look at those photos and be like, you're so dirty, gross, whatever. They associated the abuse with that and would place it, like the shame, right? They place it onto themselves, like something's wrong with me. I'm to blame for this in some way. When we all know, that's not true, but that's how it feels, right? And so in order for them to move past that, to be able to look at photos of themselves at a younger age, or even see themselves, before they started working on recovery, a lot of that had to do with those shame thoughts that were tied up in their trauma. And so that meant that usually for my patients, it was somatic experiencing or EMDR that gave them the result they were looking for, because talk therapy can sometimes only get us so far, right? It works for like 40% of people, which means that 60% of us are going to need something additional to move us across that finish line to where we feel like we are recovered. Now, I do want to throw out this caveat that when it comes to eating disorder recovery, we will, when we get really stressed out, have those thoughts sometimes come back. In the same way, those of us who struggle with anxiety will, in times of intense distress or upset, have some of those anxious symptoms creep back. But we know what they are and we have our tools to work on it, and we aren't going to let it pull us away and send us way back, down the stairs we already climbed. But it is almost like our weakness. You know how, like, I've talked about this before, but growing up, I got strep throat a lot, and that was just kind of how I got sick. If I got a head cold, I got strep throat. It was terrible. That was like the weakness in my body was in my throat. And now I got my tonsils out. Thank God, don't have that anymore. But that's kind of it, is like we all kind of have a weakness or a propensity for our mental illness or our mental health struggles. And so when things get really tough, we will find, some of those thoughts or behaviors wanting to come back, but we're stronger and we're smarter, and we have so many other tools and techniques that we can use to mitigate that. So I want you to know that recovery doesn't mean we'll never have a thought like that ever again, but it does mean that if it does come, we know what it is, we're able to manage it, and we move on without engaging. And so really, I think that maybe EMDR or somatic experiencing could get you the rest of the way, or I don't know if you're currently in trauma therapy, but continuing that work, because I believe that's that hook it's got into you. And that's why it still causes that response in us. That's why the seeing photos and stuff is still triggering, because we still have that emotional charge. And so keep working. It sounds like you're already doing amazing work. Keep doing what you're doing. Maybe we add in one of those different types of therapy, a different modality is what we call it, that will help you get through, get the rest of the way, as you say. Okay. Final question says, hey, Kati, I hear a lot about the subconscious mind, but more from a spiritual context. Can you talk more about the subconscious mind and how it affects us? Of course. I love this question. Subconscious mind is essentially things that are going on in our brain that we aren't fully aware of. Hence, subconscious, meaning not quite conscious. It's below consciousness. It's not quite there. These could be things like the reactivity that I have about a certain situation and I don't really know why. Like, I don't know why this person always pokes my buttons. Oh, it always pisses me off when people do X, Y, or Z. It could also be the way that I interact with certain people. Let's say somebody in a store says something to me and I'm like, ugh, I freak out, or I'm like, I don't like them and I don't know why. All of those are kind of representative of our subconscious mind. And that is often built on past experiences. Doesn't have to be childhood, but a lot of it is. But it could also be like how I was in my 20s and some friendships that I had, right? Some things that maybe are unresolved. And when people say unresolved, some of the terms, you're like, I kind of get what it means, but what does it mean? If I haven't processed it through in therapy or through my own journaling to the point where I can talk it out, it doesn't have any emotional charge for me, I understand it enough, and I have better ways of engaging now, right? So it's like we understand it, we heal from it, and we move forward so it doesn't continue to happen. If we haven't done that for these certain issues, then it kind of lingers in our subconscious and we can find ourselves triggered or reactive, which is really just kind of triggered. But you get what I'm saying, that like we don't really know why we're having this response, but we're having this response. And gosh dang it, I really hate that. Fuck, like it can be so frustrating. And so that's really how our subconscious mind affects us. It is honestly such a big piece of how we engage in our relationships and conversations, even with how we are at work. It really affects our entire life. So it's really important for us to pay attention to it, to talk about it in therapy. And that's why journaling is so great, because when it's just you and your journal, it can really help kind of allow you to see patterns, which our subconscious almost always leaves little like cookie crumb trails, right? See these patterns. And that can maybe help us track back, like, what are these issues, right? Like, I get really triggered by inconsistencies in relationships. If someone says they're going to do something and they don't, or there's no follow through, or they flake, that used to be extremely upsetting to me. And it would be the reason I'd end relationships, friendship, whatever. But couldn't deal, didn't like it. It took me a lot of work in therapy to realize it was because my dad worked away from home a lot. He was like a contractor. And so he would be like, yeah, I'll be at your game. And then he'd get pulled into like a work thing and he'd have to like fly to Alabama or something, random example. And so he was inconsistent by sheer nature of his work. And that was something I worked on in therapy a lot to figure out like why that was so upsetting for me in other relationships. It came from that. Now, not all of us, it's not going to be direct to our childhood. Like I said, it could be from any experience in our life. If we had a boyfriend or girlfriend who like cheated on us, and we didn't know, and then we found out, and then we tried to work it out and it got really nasty, then in our future relationship, trust might be a little tricky for us. And if they seem a little shady or we don't know where they are, it could be triggering. And so it's just important to realize the things that we've been through, to recognize these triggers and maybe where they come from, because that's really our subconscious mind. That's what it really does. And if we aren't aware of it and we don't pay attention to it and process through the things, then it can run and maybe ruin our life for us. And so that's how it affects us. It's kind of the things that we do without realizing. So if you find yourself being like, I don't know why this was so upsetting. I don't know why I reacted like that. I don't know why I keep finding myself in these types of friendships, relationships. I don't know why I keep changing jobs so much. I don't know why. If you find yourself being like, I don't know why, that's your subconscious mind. It's at work. And we know why. We just have to tap in. We haven't given ourselves an opportunity to gain insight and awareness into the kind of why behind our actions, because they all have a why. We just don't always take the time to tap in and acknowledge what that is. If that makes sense. I hope so. Thank you so much. That's our last question. Ta-da! Thank you so much for listening and watching. Thank you for sending in your questions. Like I've been saying for the past few weeks, we are changing up the podcast. We have 2 more weeks of podcasts like this. Hello, just like you've seen. Before we switch into more interviews, do not fret. We will do Q&As every so often, but I really want to take an opportunity to tap into other people's stories and experiences. Maybe it will resonate with some of you out there. And also, hear from experts and research and things like that. We can nerd out together. Let's get nerdy with it. But we will only have 2 more of these, and then we're going to shift into that. I'm so excited. We are going to go dark for a period of time. I'm posting all of this in the community tab, so but as of March 6th, AKA will be more interview focused, and you will see that rolling out. And I'm so excited, you guys. I have some very cool interviews lined up. We're going to hear great stories and learn from amazing people. So thank you for being along for the ride with me. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.